Hey, what's going on, you guys? Nick here with Nick Strength and Power. I've got a couple of interesting stories for you guys today, but the first thing I want to talk about in this video is this big story going around the bodybuilding industry right now, and that is the Mr. Olympia Brazil, which is going to be right after the real Mr. Olympia. This one will be October 18th through the 20th, and apparently they're selecting 50 athletes that are qualified for the real Olympia, and they're going to be paying for them to fly to Brazil, paying for a 2-day trip, and then also, according to their this flyer that they posted, it looks like they're not going to be having men's open bodybuilding. They only have bikini, wellness, 212, and classic physique listed, and then also this caveat that maybe guest posers are welcome as well. So what do I think of this? Honestly, I don't think it's a good idea, and I don't like it. They've tried this before. They used to have an Olympia Europe, a Mr. Olympia Europe, that I believe fell apart in 2016 or 2017 when the IFBB had the split between the IFBB Pro League and the IFBB Elite Pro, and their disagreements with Rafael Santoja, who is the president of that other organization. I believe that's what ended the Olympia Europe. So they tried this already, this idea of scaling the Olympia, and it failed last time, but that was under different ownership of the Olympia than they have now. So the reason I think it's a bad idea is because I think it diminishes and dilutes the prestige of the real Mr. Olympia title, and it seems like they know this too, because that's really the only reason I could imagine that. Obviously, the glaringly absent division from this show is they're not having men's open bodybuilding. And the only reason that I could conceive of that they wouldn't have men's open bodybuilding in a new Olympia competition is because they understand this would diminish that Olympia title. So they already know going into it that this isn't the best idea. Now, the reason I think they're doing this makes sense. I think it's obvious that they're taking a business approach to the Olympia. The Olympia is a business at the end of the day, and they're sitting there thinking, how do we scale this business? How do we make this business bigger? How do we make more money? How do we make this grow? And I think they look at the Arnold Classic model, how the Arnold Classic had the UK, and they used to have like an Arnold Classic South Africa and all these different Arnold Classics. But the problem with that is the Arnold Classic, as good of a show as it is, it's not the #1 title in bodybuilding. The Olympia is the biggest title in bodybuilding. So they can't, in my opinion, just have Olympias all over the world in addition to the main Olympia. Because think of how dumb that would be if you won the Olympia Brazil. You're telling your friends and family, I won the Olympia. They're like, oh, you won the Olympia? Well, not the real Olympia. The Olympia Brazil, you kind of have to explain it's not the real thing, and that in and of itself is kind of dumb. But I think this is the problem that bodybuilding competitions run into in general, is it's a very hard business model to scale. Because the reality is, as much as people say you have to be there in person to have the best idea of how these guys looked, to have the best view of the show, you have to be there in person. People constantly say this. But the reality is, unless you're in like the first few rows, dead center, when you're in these big venues and you're in these big auditoriums, you're watching most of the show on the big screen. That's the same thing as the live stream feed. The reality is bodybuilding is hard to scale because you can't really do a giant stadium or a bigger venue, because the further away you are from the stage, the worse the experience is, because a bodybuilder is always just going to be the size of one person posing on the X in the center of the stage. And the reality is it's just hard to see from far away. And that's kind of the limitation that bodybuilding has as a sport, is because it's an individual sport. It's hard to see if you're far away, and it's entirely based on being able to see that person's physique. Like, it's different than like a comedy act or going to a concert, because you're listening, you can hear in a big stadium or whatever. You're just there to look at these physiques. So it's a tough business model to really scale. You can't really have bigger venues because it's not a good experience. And that's always the thing that I think of when people say you had to be there in person. You had to see it in person to know how good or how bad these guys looked. And yeah, maybe that's true if you're in the first 2 rows, but most people attending will not be. And so if they can't go to a bigger venue, the other option is raise the price of the tickets. And how do we justify raising that price? I think we've already seen them try to justify that with, the lasers and the smoke and all this big production value. They're saying, oh, we're amping things up this year. Now tickets are more expensive. I don't think that really worked that well. And so now the other option is, well, let's license the Olympia name out and allow other people in other places to have an Olympia competition, which again, I think is stupid. And I think really at the end of the day, it's going to do nothing but diminish the prestige of the real Olympia. Now, the positive side of this is that there's an Olympia in another country that's going to be maybe more accessible for those fans. And obviously Brazil has a gigantic bodybuilding fan base, which is pretty clearly the motivation for this, is they're rabid bodybuilding fans there in Brazil. So looking at it from a business perspective, it seems like a good opportunity to make money off of tickets, probably have an expo, because those fans will be more likely to attend that Olympia in person versus the real Olympia, which they've been holding in the States, which points us to another problem that a lot of people have complained about, athletes in particular. As we're seeing more and more athletes recently, especially being denied visas, athletes from other countries that have to come here to compete, they win shows, they qualify for the Olympia, but then when it comes down to it, they can't get to America to compete. And that's very unfortunate because the Olympia the real Olympia title, used to be held all over the world, in London, in Africa, France, Germany, Sweden, Italy, Finland. They had it all over the world back in the day. And so that's the other negative that I see in this, is if they're just going to license out the Olympia name for people to have their own Olympias in their own countries, I think that suggests that they're not thinking about taking the Olympia on the road ever again. It's always going to be in America, which I don't know if that's the best move. Like I said, we're seeing more and more issues with athletes that are unable to travel here and compete, which seems kind of unfair that they are winning shows and qualifying and not able to compete. But then on the other hand, you can't really make that sacrifice just for 1 or 2 athletes and move the whole Olympia to their country. So I can see it from that perspective, but I think the other downside of this is kind of confirming we're keeping the Olympia here in the States and we're not moving it, which sucks for bodybuilders from other countries and fans from other countries. That makes it much more difficult for them to attend, whereas, in the past, the Olympia went all over the world. And it'll be interesting to see what happens because the El Gundi brothers, Tamer and Tarek, they're great guys, they're great promoters, but this feels like this is their test run. It's like the Olympia said, okay, we'll let you try it this year and see what happens, because this really feels very last minute. We're less than 2 months away from the real Olympia, and they're just now announcing this thing. It feels like they're throwing it together at the last minute. They don't even know who the athletes are yet. They haven't even invited anybody yet. They haven't announced prize money yet. It's kind of odd. I don't really understand. And they haven't announced so if you win this Olympia Brazil, does that qualify you for next year's real Mr. Olympia? It seems just kind of convoluted. And I saw someone give a really good example of how this kind of diminishes the prestige of the real Olympia title, even though they're not having men's open bodybuilding. I saw someone say, well, if Chris Bumstead wins the real Olympia, and then a week later Chris doesn't go to Brazil, and Ramon Dino wins the Brazil Olympia, and what does that mean? They're both now Olympia winners. I think that means the Brazil Olympia title is meaningless, and that Chris is the real Mr. Olympia. And I thought that was a good example of why this is a weird, probably bad idea, because that's likely. That seems like something that's likely to happen. Chris wins the Olympia. I think he's probably going to retire at the Olympia. I don't think he's going to go to Brazil a week later and compete in the Brazil Olympia. Ramon probably will. So if Chris wins again this year and Ramon is second, and then Ramon wins in Brazil, the Brazil Olympia, only because Chris didn't go, then it's like kind of a pointless title, right? And then I think the other side of that is then how should the bodybuilders feel, or classic physique or whatever, how should those guys feel that won the real Olympia? If they don't go to Brazil, they're probably a little annoyed that a week after the Olympia that they just won, someone else can just go and win an Olympia title somewhere else a week later, and just because they're not there. And I think that diminishes the title that they just won. So I think at the end of the day, the Brazilian fans win here because now they have an Olympia they can go to. So that's good, an easily accessible, big bodybuilding competition. We know they've got a big fan base in Brazil, and now they're going to have an easily accessible Olympia to go to. So they win. That's good. I think at the end of the day, this probably will make a ton of money for the Olympia brand, which is the goal. But I think long term, it's really going to do nothing but annoy people and diminish the value of the real Olympia title if they continue to try to branch out and have an Olympia in different countries like this. And again, no disrespect to Tarek or Tamer, who appear to be promoting this. They seem like great guys. But my feeling on this is that it's going to be extremely short-lived, just like the Olympia Europe that they tried in the 2010s. So let me know what you guys think about this in the comment section below. Good idea, bad idea, terrible idea. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Personally, like I said, I think it's a bad idea, and I think it's going to be short-lived. But let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Like and subscribe, all that good stuff. And as always, I love you guys, appreciate you guys. Nick Strength and Power, signing out. All right, guys, don't forget to click that like button and subscribe to this channel if you enjoy the content. Also, check out my Instagram at NickStrengthPower, my Facebook page, which is simply Nick Strength and Power, my secondary YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Vlogs, for vlogs and bonus content that you will not see on this channel. And consider subscribing to my third YouTube channel, Nick Strength and Pokemon, which is all things Pokemon and trading card games, completely unrelated to this channel. So if you're into that, give that one a look. And all links to merchandise and social media will be in the description box below. If you guys want a Nick Strength and Power t-shirt, that will be in the Shopify link below. Have a great day.